Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Overmeyer, and we are going to start the muscular system. This is the first lecture in a series of 5 lectures, and so that sixth lecture will be the sixth lecture is just the skeletal muscles, and we'll be going over each one of the skeletal muscles that you need to know with the diagrams. So these first 5 are basically the anatomy and basic physiology of the muscular system. So let's get started. So we know that muscles are basically responsible for movement, and there are 3 basic muscle types found in the body: skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. And most of the time, as we go through this chapter, we are going to be talking about skeletal muscle. This lecture is the only lecture that where you will hear me discuss smooth muscle and cardiac muscle. We will be spending a little bit of time on them, but most of the time we're going to be focusing on skeletal muscle. So let's look at the 3 different types of muscle tissue. Like I said, we're going to be spending most of the time on skeletal muscle. So let's look at the characteristics of skeletal muscle. So we know that when we say skeletal muscle, we're talking about those muscles that are attached to our bones that create movement. These are the muscles that we think about when we think about muscles, right? Our biceps, our triceps, our lats, our quadriceps. And so these are the ones that are attached to bones and move our bones. When we do compare the different types of muscles, the first thing we look at is whether or not they are striated. And the striations are these stripes that you see in the muscle fibers. So if we look at skeletal muscle, we can tell that they are striated, right? And you can also see where there are multiple nuclei. So why do they have multiple nuclei? Well, it's because skeletal muscle cells aren't individual cells. They are and they aren't. So skeletal muscle cells are actually a fusion of many cells. And so they're much larger than the normal cell. And if you look down here at the bottom of the page, you can see why we call them muscle fibers, because they look like a fiber. And if you look at them under a microscope, or if you have to separate, fibers in the muscle, you'll see it looks like basically they look like thread. So we can see that they're striated, those stripes, and then since they have multiple nuclei, we can say that they're multi-nucleated or multinucleate, right? Multinucleated or multinucleate. We also know that skeletal muscles are under voluntary control, and so we would say that they are voluntary, right? So striated, multinucleate, and voluntary for skeletal muscles. That means that you have to think about it in order to contract these muscles. For cardiac muscle, a little bit different, right? Cardiac muscle is only found in the heart. And you can tell, if you look back at the skeletal muscle, you can see those nice parallel muscle fibers. In cardiac muscle tissue, the muscle fibers are branched. And you can see how they are very branched and unparalleled. We can also tell that cardiac muscle cells are striated, right? They still have those striations. Cardiac muscle cells are also usually uninucleate. Meaning they have one nuclei. Cardiac muscle cells, thank goodness, are involuntary, right? We don't have to think about making our heart contract or our heartbeat in order for it to happen. It's not under conscious control. So cardiac muscles, striated, uninucleate, and involuntary. Now, if you remember back when we were talking about cells and tissues, right? We talked about cell junctions, and in the tissue chapter, when we were talking about cardiac muscle tissue, I introduced you to a special type of cell junction called an intercalated disc. So we're just coming back to that, and you can see these specialized junctions right here. Right? These are the specialized junctions called intercalated discs. And these intercalated discs are junctions that are kind of a combination between a gap junction and a desmosome that allow those chemical signals to go back and forth between muscle cells, cardiac muscle cells. And this is really important because the communication between cardiac muscle cells allows them to stay in sync with each other, and that's very important in the heart. Okay, we're going on to smooth muscle cells. Smooth muscle cells are much different, and look how different they look than the cardiac muscle and the skeletal muscle. First of all, these are the ones, these types of muscles are found in the walls of our hollow organs or our visceral organs. Most of the time when we say that, we're referring to the walls of the organs that make up our digestive tract. So the walls of our esophagus and our stomach, our small intestine, large intestine, gallbladder, pancreas, all the walls of all of those ducts that provide digestive juices into our digestive organs. So the walls of all of those organs are made up of smooth muscle. And so smooth muscle, as you can tell, is non-striated, right? Non-striated. It is also uninucleate and involuntary. Okay? So when we compare, so you might have to do this on a future test or quiz. When we compare skeletal to cardiac to smooth, we use both characteristics of the appearance and the functionality. So we're saying they're either striated or non-striated, involuntary or voluntary, uninucleate or multinucleate. Okay? All right, moving on. So when we talk about muscle cells, and you probably came across this in your textbook, you're reading about muscle cells and then they start calling them muscle fibers. Well, muscle cells are the same thing as muscle fibers. I hope that clears up any confusion you had while you were reading in the text. And we call them muscle fibers because, again, that's what they look like. They look like fibers of thread or string. Also, just to kind of give you a preview of all of the terminology that you're going to be coming across. All of the terminology, a lot of the terminology you're going to be using in this chapter is going to have some specific prefixes with it. So the prefix is myo, mice, and sarco. You'll see those prefixes on a lot of the different terms that you come across and that you'll need to know. For example, the myocardium is the heart muscle, is what we refer to the heart muscle as, the myocardium. The sarcolemma is the term we use to refer to the muscle fiber membrane. Instead of an endoplasmic reticulum, muscle fibers have sarcoplasmic reticulum. And instead of the cytoplasm, it's sarcoplasm. And this middle prefix here, mice, this actually means mouse. Why do you suppose they have a term that means mouse used to refer to muscles? What do you think? So I want you to do this. I want you to raise your arm up and make a fist and flex your bicep. Flex and relax, flex and relax, flex and relax very quickly. And I want you to watch what your bicep looks like. So back in the day, before they were able to do autopsies and look inside of bodies to see how they work, when muscles contracted, it looked like there was a mouse under the skin. And so this is how they came up with mice, right, as a term or prefix that refers to muscle. So, fun fact. Okay, moving on. Let's look at the gross anatomy. So we've already gone over a lot of the kind of the basic characteristics of muscle. What we haven't talked about is the gross anatomy. And so right now we're going to go through the different anatomical features of a muscle tissue. Excuse me. So looking at this muscle tissue, I want you to kind of look at how it's arranged, how the fibers are arranged. What does it remind you of? What does its structure remind you of? Well, if you said a rope, that's exactly what that was my thinking too. And it is arranged. All the fibers are arranged like a rope. If you look at a rope, you have lots of very tiny fibers bundled together and then bundled together again into the actual rope. And that's what we have here with the muscle. And each of the bundles are bundled or covered in connective tissue. And it's those connective tissues that you're going to need to know. By the way, I have this diagram right here is available on your agenda as a diagram that's labeled as well as unlabeled, so you can practice. So let's go ahead and go over the different connective tissue coverings for each of the different layers of muscle tissue. So we're going to start with the outermost layer, and this outermost layer is this layer right here, right? This layer right here, and this layer is referred to as the epimysium. So what does epi mean? We've come across that prefix before. Whenever you see epi on a term in anatomy and physiology or biology, you know it means on the outside or above or the top, right? So epi, and then here's that prefix, mysium, right? Mice. So the epimysium is the outer connective tissue covering. And then inside, you see all of these, I'm not erasing for some reason. Let's go back here and then go to the eraser. Okay. Anyway, so this epimysium covers all of these smaller bundles, right? And these smaller bundles, so we have a bundle, if you look at it, we have a bundle here, right? And we have a bundle here. Here's a bundle. And these bundles are called, and most of you got this right on the test, on the quiz, fascicles. The bundles themselves are called fascicles. And then the connective tissue that surrounds the fascicle, the connective tissue is called the perimysium. Perimysium, right? Now, we've talked about remember the periosteum, right? The connective tissue on the outside of the bone. So this is the perimysium, right? And this is the connective tissue around the fascicle. Okay? Now, so in the fascicle, we have bundles of individual muscle fibers. And so this whole thing here, from there to there, right? This whole thing is a fascicle. And it's bundling all of these individual muscle fibers. So this here, I'm going to put a dot right in the middle here, where that red part is. That would be the muscle fiber. So that is the muscle fiber, one individual muscle cell, right? And so around each muscle fiber, we also have a connective tissue, and that connective tissue is called the endomysium. So endo. Remember the endosteum, that the connective tissue that covered the inside of the medullary cavity of the long bone. This is the endomysium. So we have the endomysium around the muscle fiber. We have the perimysium around the fascicle. And then we have the epimysium around the entire muscle tissue. Now you can also see this transparent tissue here. We call that the fascia. It's a fun word to say, fascia, right? The fascia is what, when we dissect cats, hopefully we get to dissect cats this year. So when we dissect cats, the first thing I have you do is to remove all the fascia off the muscles so that we can more clearly see the direction of the fibers, and we can tell where one muscle stops and the other one starts. You can also see here that the epimysium is kind of continuous with and kind of turns into this tendon, right? And we have two types of tendons. This is called a cord-like tendon, right? A cord-like tendon. We also have sheet-like tendons, and we're going to get to those in a minute. So this is one of the diagrams. You'll probably have to be able to identify the parts of the gross anatomy of a muscle tissue. And so, again, you have a labeled and unlabeled diagram available for you on your agenda. So, this is just a slide in here that reminds you that the muscles attach to bone, for sure. But sometimes they have an indirect attachment. And so they might first attach to cartilage, right? For example, articular cartilage or fibrocartilage. And they also might connect first to connective tissue coverings. Up here we have that term aponeurosis, if you were wondering how to spell it. This aponeurosis is a sheet-like tendon. I'm going to change that. So a sheet-like tendon. The aponeurosis, that's a great example of a sheet-like tendon, is the one that connects the frontalis to the parietal bone and the occipitalis also to the parietal bone. So the frontalis is the muscle on your forehead. The occipitalis is the muscle on the back of your head over the occipital bone. And so it's kind of, the tendon is just kind of a sheet that connects those two muscles and also connects both of those muscles to the parietal bone. Okay. We're going to spend a little bit of time, like I said, we're going to spend a little bit of time on smooth muscle and cardiac muscle. What I want you to know about smooth muscle is, first of all, instead of having fiber-like cells, these cells are spindle-shaped and kind of twisted a little bit. So also in smooth muscle, we usually have two layers found in those visceral organs. And the two layers, you can see here, I'm going to just draw a line dividing these two layers. This outermost layer is the longitudinal layer, and then the inside layer is the circular layer, right? Most of the digestive organs have two layers of muscle tissue. And if you think about contraction, instead of contracting and just shortening, this contraction kind of makes those muscles kind of twist a little bit. So all of the visceral organs have two layers of smooth muscle. Now, there is an exception to that. Our stomach actually has three layers of smooth muscle tissue because it has to churn the food. It does a little bit of extra work, so it has three layers. And then we have the cardiac muscle. Again, we know that the cardiac muscle is found only in the heart, and its cells are also kind of spindle-shaped. Just remember, for cardiac muscles, they have striations, they're branched, uninucleate, and they have that special cell junction called an intercalated discs. This last slide just kind of goes over the functions of muscles. We know that muscles produce movement. They usually span across different joints and produce movement at those joints. They also help to stabilize joints. Also maintaining posture depending on the tone of the muscle. And then we know that muscles are responsible for generating heat. How do they do this? Well, muscles do work. And if you know anything about physics, you know that work is not efficient. And when any work is done, some of that work is lost as energy. And in the case of the muscular system, that energy that's lost is lost as heat. And that's why when you're cold, you're supposed to, move around, jump around, run, and that working your muscles that way is going to generate that heat and warm you up. Okay, so that was lecture 1. Thanks for tuning in. And if you have any questions over this, I'll be happy to answer those. You can email me, or remember, our office hours at 1 o'clock on Tuesday and Thursday. So, during those office hours, please feel free to email me or text me, or you can jump into the Zoom session that you'll be getting an invitation for. Okay? All right. Have a great day.